When I sharply snapped back, Julie yelled at me, "Stop leeching off Dad." Hearing Julie's angry voice, I made up my mind that it was no use. I gave up in my heart. My feelings for Julie did not reach her. The emotional bond I was trying to establish with Julie was broken. Julie needs to reflect on her actions and face the consequences. I will tell her the truth. My name is Kelly, and I am 53 years old. I have been married to Jerry for 8 years. Both Jerry and I had been married before we met each other. I divorced my previous husband because he had an affair. One day when I came home, I found divorce papers from the lawyer in the mail. Since then, my ex-husband never returned. I didn't even know where he was, but I submitted the response to the court. We used to argue a lot and weren't very close, so I had expected this to happen someday. But it was so sudden that I couldn't eat and felt very depressed. I couldn't just sit around, so I threw myself into my work. I filled the void in my personal life with work. I worked frantically and studied marketing and management. Thanks to that, I didn't think about remarriage or dating, and before I knew it, I was 42. My family runs a small diner. It's a cozy place that serves set meals during the day. The food is good, plentiful, and affordable, making it popular with the townsfolk. It's a small town, but almost everyone must have eaten our food at least once. My father's chicken steak is the restaurant's specialty. When Jerry proposed to me, I was over the moon, but hearing that he had a daughter made me anxious about the future. Will this work out? The thought of suddenly becoming the mother of an adult daughter was crushing. My happy feelings completely deflated. Now my heart feels heavy and dark. That's when I got a text from Jerry saying, "No rush on your response." I meant every word I said earlier. His calm reply soothed my anxious heart like a receding tide. Yes, Jerry is serious and kind. He would support me through anything. As for his daughter Julie, even though she's a concern, she's an adult and won't act like a child. She will understand about Jerry and me. I decided to accept Jerry's proposal. When I told Jerry I would accept his proposal, he was overjoyed. Seeing Jerry express his happiness so openly made me truly glad to have chosen to be with him. Since we were both remarrying, we just had a small dinner to introduce each other to our families. But Julie was in the worst mood I had ever seen. She was irritable and took out her feelings on the staff, saying, "So annoying, come on, bring the next dish." I asked her to calm down, and she snapped back, "Shut up, don't order me around, old lady." The term old lady took my breath away. I had met Julie a few times before, but this was the first time things had turned out this way. Is this Julie's true nature? After the introduction party, I discussed Julie's behavior with Jerry. Perhaps we should consider postponing the marriage, I suggested. Wouldn't it be better if Julie sorted out her feelings first? Jerry shook his head. Indeed, Julie's attitude today was problematic, but she has already moved out of the house, and we won't be seeing her every day. Being tied down by an independent daughter forever doesn't seem right to me. Jerry suggested that being confined during today's introduction party might have irritated Julie. Normally, Julie is quiet and not the kind to get angry like that. Please give Julie a chance. She's really a good kid at heart, he encouraged. Encouraged by Jerry's words, I decided to proceed with the marriage. I was determined to marry Jerry and live my life with him. Yet every time I saw Julie, I was reminded of that incident, which only increased my anxiety. I started living with Jerry, and we bought an apartment halfway between my company and Jerry's. Julie was living alone in an apartment near her company, so it was just Jerry and me living together. The first 3 years passed without any problems, and we were happy. The only tough part was during the holiday season when we met Julie, but other than that, it was peaceful. However, in the 5th year of our marriage, we faced a big problem. Julie moved in with us because her apartment was undergoing major renovations. She said the noise and the workers coming and going were too much, so she moved in with us. I had a bad feeling about it, and I was right. We turned a room we used as a storeroom into Julie's room. She complained that it was cramped and poorly lit, but we convinced her to tolerate it. For the moving-in celebration, we decided to have pizza. When I was about to order our usual delivery, Julie went ahead and placed an order from a famous steakhouse. The dishes from there are delicious but very expensive, about 4 times more than the food we usually eat. I was about to refuse, but Jerry gave me a look. I've recently realized that Jerry is lenient with Julie. He tends to give in to her whims, and perhaps that's why she gets upset easily when things don't go her way. She generally has an attitude and seems to think of the staff in any store as her servants. I've never seen Julie use words like "excuse me" or "thank you" to the staff, or even to me. Living with Julie was like that. I was feeling down, but this was too much to worry about from the start. In the end, we ordered the food Julie wanted. When the dishes arrived, Julie complained that it was late. Our order was supposed to be refused at first due to the sudden order, but Julie insisted and made them deliver. She complained that they were late. I apologized profusely to the delivery person while receiving the dishes. The payment, of course, came from our wallet. As I checked the contents of the 3 delivery boxes, I felt even more stressed. I found 2 assortments of appetizers and steaks and 1 box of hot dogs. Puzzled, I laid out the food on the table and began preparing drinks and soup. Julie and Jerry took their seats. Julie poured beer for Jerry, raised her glass with his, and began to drink. To Julie, I must be nothing more than a servant or maid. Jerry doesn't correct her. Is something going on? When I sat down at the dining table, in front of me was the box of hot dogs. I let out a soft and Julie looked at me with a smug half-smile. "That should be enough for you," she said with a snort, then began eating the appetizers. I had some vegetable sticks while Julie enjoyed the shrimp cocktail, fresh salad, and chicken wings. It was a clear act of spite from Julie towards me. I thought this would surely anger Jerry, but all he did was sigh as he looked at Julie. He offered his box of appetizers to me, saying, "Have some of this." I nodded slightly and took some portions from Jerry. I was tempted to scold Julie but restrained myself, considering that a confrontation on the first day might complicate our future living together. Moreover, I felt like I had taken Jerry away from Julie. Living with Julie started in the worst possible way. Jerry doesn't talk much about Julie. Whenever I ask about her, he just says, "She's at a difficult age, please forgive her." While working, helping out at my parents' house, studying, and doing household chores, I was already swamped. Now I had to take care of Julie on top of everything. Julie is simply selfish. She does nothing around the house. It's hard to believe she lived alone before. Moreover, Julie's requests are incredibly bothersome. Even a single piece of clothing came with a litany of instructions. Which items required dry cleaning, which should be hand-washed, and which needed air drying. When it comes to food, she specifies supermarkets and even the origin of the products. I usually plan meals based on sales and featured items at the supermarket, but that's not possible when accommodating Julie's preferences. I found myself planning meals while also checking recipes on the internet. As a result, our household expenses have nearly doubled. Julie doesn't contribute financially to the household at all. Even when I talk to Jerry about it, he just says, "Please bear with it." Unwilling to stir up unnecessary conflict, I chose to tolerate the situation. I reluctantly decided to cut back on work. I was valued and had high expectations at my company, with even hints of a possible executive position in the future. But now, family comes first. I applied for reduced working hours at the company. This decision will likely end any chance of career advancement, but I did it for Jerry and Julie. I've decided to endure. While shopping for dinner at the supermarket after work, I received a call from my mother. She told me that my father had been hospitalized. "What? Dad's in the hospital," I said. After hanging up, I hurried to the hospital. Our family home is relatively close by, so I arrived in about an hour. In the hospital room, my father was watching a baseball game on TV with earphones in. Noticing me, he took out his earphones and smiled. "Mom just exaggerated over the phone," he said with a laugh. Relieved, my legs gave way, and I slumped to the floor. "My back's been hurting," my father explained. "It seems years of standing at work have taken a toll on it. I've decided to go through with the surgery," he told me with a laugh. At that moment of relief, I remembered something important. I hadn't informed Jerry or Julie about any of this. I pulled out my cell phone from my shopping bag and saw countless missed calls from Julie. My heart was pounding as I hurriedly called her back. Julie's voice sounded displeased. "Where are you, and what are you doing? Hurry back and make my dinner," she demanded. I apologized reflexively. "I'm sorry, my dad's been hospitalized." Julie was silent for a moment, but then started scolding me sharply. "Huh? Your dad? Your dad really?" Julie's tone became vulgar and aggressive. I felt intimidated and shrank back. In a small voice, I replied, "Yes, he was suddenly hospitalized." "And what does that have to do with my dinner?" Julie's reasoning was becoming absurd. "You're my mother, right? Understand it's a parent's job to make meals for their child." This might be understandable if Julie were still in elementary or middle school, but Julie is 25 and has lived alone before. She's fully an adult. For such an adult to demand meals from a parent is beyond harassment. I felt compelled to stand up for myself. I'm not good with Julie's assertive tone or harsh words. Although I was scared of being yelled at, I decided to confront her. "Is it wrong to worry about my dad?" "You should understand," I said. I could hear Julie gasp over the phone. "Shut up! Don't talk back to me!" she snapped, clearly taken aback. "If it were your dad, you'd rush to his side, wouldn't you?" Julie fell silent. Maybe she was imagining if it were Jerry who had been suddenly hospitalized. Surely Julie would be worried if something happened to Jerry. That's what I thought. However, Julie's response was shocking. "Huh, I'd ignore it if my dad was hospitalized," she said. I was speechless. I wanted to believe it was a lie. "Anyway," I said, "sorry, but you'll need to eat out today," and hung up. This call made one thing clear to me. Julie doesn't see me as her mother. In fact, she doesn't even see me as a person. She must think of me as a mechanical servant or a slave. Otherwise, she couldn't say such heartless things. It's saddening, but I can't just dwell on sadness. Things can't go on like this. I felt a strong need to take action. Even after my father is discharged, he won't be able to work as before. There's only so much my mother can do. I need to address the situation at my family's home quickly. Balancing my family's needs, taking care of Julie, household chores, and work was impossible. I decided to resign from my job. Though the company tried hard to retain me, there was no other way. Just as my father was discharged and we managed to reopen our shop, something happened to Jerry. He ended up being hospitalized and his condition was quite severe. Dr. Richard, the chief physician, said he might never be discharged. When I informed Julie of Jerry's condition, she reacted nonchalantly and said something unbelievable. "Does this mean it's going to cost a lot of money?" Julie seemed more concerned about money than Jerry's health. What could this mean? I couldn't understand her reasoning. Does Julie not care about Jerry at all? This is not the time to worry about money. "Do you understand?" I became emotional and retorted. "I know that, but if we don't have money, we'll be in trouble, won't we?" Julie pulled out her cell phone and started making a call. "Hello, Uncle David? Actually, Dad is sick and has been hospitalized," she said in an uncomfortably sweet tone. "I was hoping you could help with the hospital bills." Julie schemed on the phone, trying to get her uncle to pay for the expenses. "Then you can ask Mom about the rest." After ending the call, Julie gave me a cold smile, sending a chill down my spine. "So you'll have to talk things over with Uncle David," she said, humming a tune as she went back to her room. I was still reeling from Jerry's hospitalization when Julie's actions left me stunned. After a while, I received a call from my brother-in-law. I explained Jerry's condition and the outlook for the future. I broke down crying midway, but managed to explain everything. I also assured him that I would take care of the hospital bills, so he shouldn't worry. After hanging up, I slapped my cheeks with both hands to psych myself up. I can't afford to mope around over this. But bad things continued to happen. After our marriage, Jerry was entrusted with managing his parents' company. However, the business began to struggle. The cost of raw materials had been rising for years, leading to higher purchase prices and reduced profits. The company was so strapped that it couldn't afford to pay employees' salaries. In the past, Jerry's family used to help my family's business, but now the roles were reversed, and my family was supporting Jerry's company. With the business in trouble, Jerry had cut his own salary, so I was paying for the hospital bills with my salary. Most of the insurance policies list the company as the beneficiary. Ironically, Jerry's insurance money gave the company a bit of a breather during these hard times. In such a difficult time, Julie lashed out at me. The reason was a photo on my phone of a dining scene at a restaurant. Don't mess around using other people's money for such luxury. Julie berated me with vulgar language and an aggressive tone. The photo was from a time I was asked to sample dishes at a restaurant I visited for work. A client took the photo and sent it to me, but unfortunately, it backfired. "You're using our money for stuff like this." Julie's words made me realize something. It seems she's under the impression that I'm living off Jerry's money. The reality is quite the opposite. Currently, I'm the one providing for most of our household expenses. I've repaid all the money. I borrowed from Jerry in the past with interest. Julie's anger didn't subside. It seemed futile to say anything at the moment. Julie's command, "Get out," compelled me to leave the house. I left a single piece of paper on the dining table and chose to spend the night at a hotel. It would be useless to explain anything to Julie. If I tried to explain, she might start depending on my money, and I wanted to avoid that. I resolved to stick to my plan and take appropriate action. I made a promise to myself. I went to visit Jerry's hospital room. I visit every day, but today felt special. Julie didn't come today either. Jerry gave me a sad smile, and his smile always reassured me. "I'm sorry for being so inadequate," I said. Jerry shook his head. "It's not that. It's my fault Julie turned out this way because of me." Jerry began to share something he hadn't told me about Julie before. Julie is not Jerry's biological child. His ex-wife had an affair, and Julie was the result. Jerry found out just before his ex-wife passed away. Hearing this, Jerry felt an indescribable anger. The person most at fault was lying in bed, soon to pass away, and he couldn't direct his anger anywhere. Julie wasn't to blame, and she still thinks of Jerry as her real father. His ex-wife passed away without revealing anything about the other man involved. Jerry was left with unresolved anger. He couldn't treat Julie the same way as before and ended up pushing her away. For Julie, her mother suddenly disappeared, and her father became distant. It's no surprise her personality became twisted. From that point on, Julie ceased to trust anyone, viewing Jerry solely as a financial resource. Since then, I've become nothing but an ATM to Julie, Jerry said with a sad smile. Julie's selfishness is excessive, and her disdain for others is over the top. Julie found out I wasn't her real father when she was in high school, Jerry said. She didn't seem that surprised. She must have had her suspicions, he added with a sarcastic smile. I explained to Jerry what I was about to do. Initially, he looked reluctant, his expression conveying a sense of skepticism, as if questioning, "Is all that really necessary? I've already looked into it. If I don't do it, things could get even worse." I told him, "If I don't, someone else surely will." Jerry closed his eyes, deep in thought. I decided to wait quietly. After a while, Jerry opened his eyes. "All right, I'll leave it to you." I held Jerry's hand. His hand felt bony and had become much smaller. I struggled to hold back my tears, forcing a smile. I left the hospital room and stepped into the corridor where I saw Dr. Richard. I handed him a scientific magazine showcasing the latest medical technologies. "Please help my husband," I said to him and left the hospital. Now it was just a matter of taking action. To psych myself up, I slapped both of my cheeks sharply with my hands. This always helped me focus. After spending a night at a hotel, I checked my cell phone for messages and returned home before noon the next day. I could hear the sound of the TV and Julie's laughter coming from the living room. Julie was watching TV and laughing heartily. It was a rare sight. She's usually in a foul mood, but today she seemed happy. Looking around, I noticed that several things were missing. The photos of Jerry and me, souvenirs from our trips, and other decorative items were gone. Some things are missing, I said to myself, prompting a reaction from Julie. "Oh, I threw them out your stuff," she said. Shocked, I entered the bedroom. The room was empty. No computer, no TV, no stereo, even the bed and furniture were gone. The closet was empty too. I returned to the living room and confronted Julie. "What's the meaning of this?" I demanded. Julie looked at me with disdain while lying on the sofa. "They were needless, so I disposed of them," she said. I put my hands on my hips, visibly angry. "Needless? What are you going to do?" When I raised my voice, Julie made a face of disgust, averted her gaze, and sighed dramatically. "I'm tired of living with you," she said. Julie's words were outrageous. "What do you mean by that?" "This home belongs to Jerry and me," I retorted sharply. Julie's face turned sour. "Stop leeching off Dad," she said. "Leeching? What could she possibly mean by that?" Julie suddenly brought up something unexpected. Come to think of it, she had mentioned our money before. Could Julie be under some grand misunderstanding? As I stood there unable to respond, Julie's irritation grew. "Do I have to spell it out for you? I'm saying stop depending on Dad's money," she said. Julie and I never got along well, but I had always tried to be considerate towards her. I complied with all of Julie's requests, even those that felt like harassment, because I wanted to get along with her. As the second wife, I've always strived to be kind and loving. Feeling somewhat guilty, I still received such treatment in return. I wasn't leeching off anyone. I was just trying to do everything for Julie. I wanted to tell her this, but the words wouldn't come. While I struggled to speak, Julie added insult to injury. "Dad's not coming back anyway, so there's no reason for you to be here." "That's not true," I replied. Julie raised her voice. "Shut up. I don't want to hear your excuses." Hearing her hysterical voice, I made up my mind. It was no use. I realized I gave up in my heart. My feelings for Julie did not reach her. The emotional bond I was trying to build with her was broken. I felt my feelings for Julie fading. Just a moment ago, I thought of us as family, but now we're complete strangers. From the beginning, it was clear Julie was only using me for her own convenience. That's why she could so boldly drive me away. Julie needs to reflect on her actions and face the consequences. I resolved to confront Julie with the truth. Determined, I locked eyes with Julie. Julie looked back at me with fearful eyes. "What? Got a problem?" "No, I'll leave, just as you wish," I said. I checked other rooms, the bathroom, and the toilet. "Don't bother looking. Everything's gone." "I had it picked up by a collection service," Julie said. I picked up a flyer from the living room. "That's the place I asked them," she added. The flyer was just there conveniently. This was something I had left in the living room. I almost let out a laugh at Julie's shallowness. Forcing a stern face, I glared at Julie. "I hope you come to realize the gravity of your actions." With those parting words, I immediately left the house. As soon as I stepped out of the apartment, I contacted the waste collection service that had emailed me in the morning. The collection service had kept my belongings in storage. Not only did they store them, but they also moved them into the storage unit I had rented. I thanked them politely over the phone before hanging up. I intentionally left that flyer on the living room table. I thought Julie might just do something like that, given her personality. Seeking out a collection agency would have likely been too bothersome for her. I figured that if a flyer for a junk removal service was readily available on the table, Julie might be inclined to call the listed number. I was willing to forgive her if she didn't go that far, but Julie went through with it. My patience finally ran out. I went to the hospital to see Jerry. It seemed Jerry was getting some explanation from Dr. Richard when I entered the room. Dr. Richard left as I walked in. Jerry's face was unusually happy. It was a shame I had to bring up such a topic when he was in a good mood. Reluctantly, I shared the earlier incident with Jerry. His face immediately clouded over. "But it can't be helped, right?" I said, gently holding Jerry's thin hand. "Thank you for understanding," Jerry replied. In fact, I had already decided where I was moving to. Anticipating this situation, I had prepared a new place. Even if I wasn't kicked out, there was a chance I would leave on my own. Either way, I needed a new place. I planned to move and start a new life with a fresh mindset. It's just that things are happening a bit sooner than planned. Jerry smiled gently, comforting me. To be honest, being kicked out by Julie didn't really put me in a bind. It just moved my plans up by a couple of weeks. But now I'd have to live in a hotel for 3 weeks. Maybe it's my frugality that makes me think it's a waste. Regardless, I resolved in my heart to be prepared for whatever Julie might do next. I started taking the actions I had prepared for in advance. Once the move was successfully completed and I had settled down, Julie called me. As soon as I answered, Julie's loud voice filled my ear. "You took our money, didn't you?" she accused. I played dumb and asked, "Huh, what are you talking about?" My feigned ignorance seemed to infuriate Julie further. "Don't play dumb. It's about Dad's hospital bills. The hospital just called saying they need to be paid." I was expecting this call around now. "Oh, that," I replied in a deliberately relaxed tone. I purposely hesitated and sighed. "You should pay it. It's not my concern anymore. You have the living expenses that Dad transferred, right? Just pay it out of that." "That's true, but I don't have the bank book or ATM card for that account," Julie said. Julie should have the insurance documents and bank books, but the account balance is almost empty. "The balance is gone. You must have taken it," she accused desperately. The more heated Julie became, the more calmly I behaved. "I didn't take it," I said. I said with a composed face, "Don't lie. Who else could have used it?" I struggled to suppress my laughter. Ever since Jerry's salary significantly decreased, there has hardly been any money in that account. A simple bank statement update would reveal this, but Julie probably hadn't done that. There was just very little money to begin with. Even with this explanation, Julie wasn't satisfied. "If you can't pay the hospital bills, you should just use your own salary," I suggested. Julie remained silent. Given Julie's spendthrift nature, it's unlikely she has any savings. She tends to spend her salary as soon as she gets it. I knew how much Julie earned because Jerry had previously informed me about her earnings. Moreover, Jerry even used to give Julie an allowance. "You're old enough to have some savings, aren't you?" I said. I could almost hear Julie grinding her teeth. After a long silence, so long I thought the call had dropped, Julie suddenly raised her voice. "What's wrong with me spending the money I earned?" Julie continued to rant. "You're the one who spent all the money Dad gave us, aren't you?" I could hear Julie's heavy breathing. The farce was over, so I got to the heart of the matter. "If it's not savings, then use the money you acquired dishonestly," I said. I heard a thud. It seemed Julie dropped her cell phone, probably too shocked to keep a grip on it. "How did you know about that?" Julie didn't deny it. She had just admitted to the wrongdoing. There was no escaping it now. "We will discuss the details when we meet," I told Julie and hung up. I had sent the meeting place via email. I also attached the audio file of Julie saying, "How did you know about that?" to the email. I had recorded the conversation with Julie. It's always wise to have evidence on hand. I had arranged a meeting with Julie, and all that was left was to present my evidence. The next day, Julie showed up at the agreed meeting place. It was the entrance to the apartment building where I lived. I called out to Julie. Julie looked up, surprised. Here? Yes, I sent you the address, didn't I? Julie craned her neck to look up. You live in this tower? She asked, staring at the tallest and most expensive apartment building in the area. An Italian sports car was even parked at the entrance. This place is worth over $1 million, isn't it? Julie muttered. I led the astonished Julie to my apartment, which is close to the top floor. Even with the high-speed elevator, it takes a while to reach the top. During the ride, Julie was nervously biting her nails and trembling, clearly sensing something bad was about to happen. Upon arriving, I unlocked the door with my cell phone, which also serves as a key. Julie looked at me with a surprised expression. I entered the room without minding her reaction. The living room offers a panoramic view. The apartment we used to live in looks tiny from up here. The living room is spacious with a generous layout, and the kitchen is large. I had Julie sit on the sofa. She was clutching her bag tightly, clearly tense. I made some coffee and handed it to her. Julie took the cup with a rattling sound, trying not to drop it. It's too spacious. It's unsettling, I said mockingly, smiling at Julie. She remained silent. I've been preparing to live here for a while, I continued. Julie must have thought of me as a parasite living off Jerry. No wonder she was shocked. Shall we start the discussion then? This is Scott, my lawyer. I introduced Scott, who was waiting in the back, to Julie. She seemed too overwhelmed to even notice Scott. Her gaze was unsettled, darting around nervously. Ignoring Julie's state, Scott began laying out documents on the table. Julie barely responded to my attempts to engage her in conversation, distracted by the room. Just when I thought we couldn't have a proper discussion, Julie mumbled, How could you afford such a penthouse? Figuring she was curious, I answered, Julie, I just bought it the regular way. Don't lie. How could you afford it? She asked. I had the income to afford it. As my family's small restaurant began to recover, I not only advised, but also got actively involved in its management. The business flourished in an exciting way, and I quit my corporate job as I got busier. Julie likely assumed I had become merely a housewife after leaving my job. We turned the small restaurant into a corporation, and I became an executive. The business was doing well, expanding into multiple outlets like a specialty grilled chicken restaurant and a fine dining place. That's why I could easily afford this penthouse apartment, I explained. I earned that much. I shared the story of my family's business. Julie only knew that Jerry had helped when my family's restaurant was struggling. I then told her how my family's business eventually came to support Jerry's company, and that I had become an executive. Hearing my story, Julie slumped in defeat. I wondered if Julie was feeling regret, but she suddenly looked up and said something unexpected. All right, I'll live here too. Let's make up. What is she talking about? I thought, but I just silently stared at Julie. There's enough space here for my room too, right? She asked. I glared at Julie with a cold look. Save your dreaming for when you're actually asleep. She was completely unfazed by my sarcasm. I'm serious, she said. That's when Scott cleared his throat. He probably couldn't bear to go along with Julie's absurd statements any longer. Scott handed Julie a bill. Looking at the bill, Julie's face turned pale, her hands trembled, and sweat formed on her forehead. This is a fraudulent bill. It's a phantom charge, Scott stated. After graduating from college, Julie had worked at Jerry's company. However, she conspired with a client company to make unjust charges to the company. The illicit gains were shared with the accomplice from the client company. To set Julie up, I had hired a detective and conducted a thorough investigation. An individual from the client company who conspired with Julie leaked information to Scott. I immediately consulted with my in-laws, who had stepped down from the presidency to become chairpersons, about the matter. They were furious and promised appropriate punishment. Embezzlement on the job is quite the crime indeed, Scott added. If convicted of fraud, you could face up to 11 years in prison, not to mention civil damages. Wait a minute, there must be some mistake. Julie desperately tried to deny it. However, the evidence was complete, and the accomplice had confessed. Admit it. The charges against you are only getting heavier, Scott said. Just as I thought, Julie was gripping the bill tightly enough to tear it. She suddenly stood up. I'm sorry, Julie apologized. Sorry doesn't cut it, I spoke in a flat, emotionless voice. Especially since you've done it habitually, it's deemed extremely malicious. Julie collapsed to the floor and began to apologize. Please forgive me, Julie sobbed. No chance, I replied coldly. Her face became a mess of tears, and her usually perfect makeup was completely ruined. If things continue this way, losing your job will be the least of your worries. You might even get arrested. Julie's apologies wouldn't earn her forgiveness. Her tears and runny nose left dark stains on the carpet. Please forgive me. Just staying silent about it is enough, she pleaded. I turned my back on Julie, who kept apologizing. This isn't just between you and me, I said. Julie seemed unable to let go and made an outrageous offer. Then I'll give you money. I'll charge the company again and give you that money. I sighed deeply and pressed my hand to my forehead. Nothing I said would make a difference now. Julie had no intention of repenting. She was solely focused on navigating her way out of the predicament. There's no helping you. You need to be properly judged, I said, revealing the voice recorder in my hand. Julie realized she had made an outrageous proposal. She trembled, covering her mouth with her hand. I'll submit this as evidence to the police, I declared. Julie kept her head down, as if something had been drained from her. Scott and I then escorted Julie out of the room. Leaning against the wall, she staggered toward the elevator. Once Scott had departed, I collapsed into the depths of the sofa, exhausted. It was finally over. I reported the outcome to Jerry via email. As planned, Julie was criminally charged by the company. She was arrested, and the employee from the partner company was indicted. While on bail, Julie had been dating this employee. Whether Julie really had romantic feelings is unclear. It's highly possible she pretended to like him just to use him. Julie is now detained in a holding cell awaiting trial. She also faces a lawsuit for damages from the company. Julie was disliked at the company, and perhaps this was a form of retribution. Being the president's daughter, she was exceedingly unpopular among the employees. She also had a haughty attitude toward clients, which negatively impacted performance. Not only was her attitude presumptuous, but Julie also made many mistakes. There were numerous complaints, but no one dared to criticize her because she was the president's daughter. This is what I heard from Jerry. Jerry is still hospitalized, focusing on his treatment. He entrusted the presidency to Gary, his reliable executive vice president. This decision had been made quite a while ago. With Julie gone, the transition proceeded smoothly. Jerry is fighting his illness despite the challenges in getting discharged. A pioneering treatment available in France offered new hope. Holding the published scientific journal, Dr. Richard and I had many discussions. Dr. Richard understood and agreed, and Jerry will soon go to France for treatment. Of course, it's private healthcare not covered by insurance. I'm not worried about the treatment costs. If necessary, I can just sell the penthouse. Jerry will surely recover, and he will surely smile at me with that gentle smile again. I can hardly wait for that day. Hi there, I'm Laura. I'm 27 years old, and I recently found myself navigating life as a newly divorced woman after separating from my husband, Larry. Our love story began back in college, where we shared classes and quickly fell in love. We had a strong bond, but there was always a shadow over our relationship. Larry's mother, Lily. From the very beginning, Lily seemed to harbor an inexplicable dislike for me. She was always meddling in our relationship, offering unsolicited advice, and making me feel unwelcome. I expressed my concerns to Larry many times, but he struggled to confront his mother. He was torn between his loyalty to her and his love for me. Eventually, I resigned myself to endure Lily's criticisms, believing that Larry might have been unknowingly sharing too much with her, giving her fuel to criticize me. Our relationship faced many challenges, with frequent arguments about his mother's influence. But over time, Larry began to understand my perspective and stopped sharing the intimate details of our life with her. After 5 years of dating, we got married, much to Lily's dismay. Despite her attempts to interfere with our marriage, we managed to distance ourselves from her toxic presence for a while. During this period, both Larry and I found success in our careers. Although I admired Larry's accomplishments, I started to feel the need for something more personal, something that was mine alone. We had split our expenses unequally, with me covering the majority, but that didn't bother me much. What really weighed on me was the growing void I felt inside, a desire to pursue something creative and fulfilling. Drawing on my passion for design, I decided to explore graphic design as a side venture. It became a personal project, something I could call my own, and I kept it under wraps for a while, nurturing it quietly as I figured out where it might take me. I decided to take a leap of faith and enrolled in graphic design courses, investing in equipment without Larry's knowledge. My best friend, Mary, was the only person I confided in about this new venture. She was incredibly supportive, offering me both encouragement and practical advice as I developed my skills. As my confidence grew, Mary introduced me to people who were interested in hiring me, even though I was just starting out. They appreciated my work and trusted me with their projects, helping me gradually build a client base. This new source of income made a big difference in our lives. It eased the financial pressures we were facing and allowed Larry and me to enjoy a more comfortable lifestyle. With each paycheck, I saved a portion, dreaming of surprising Larry with something special as a token of my appreciation for his support. However, I hadn't mentioned any of this to him yet, and every time I thought about bringing it up, it seemed like he was avoiding serious conversations. It wasn't long before I noticed something was off. Larry became increasingly distant, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something from me. The first real sign of trouble came when Larry admitted that he had spent his entire paycheck on investments just a week after receiving it. We had a heated argument about it, but we managed to patch things up for the time being. To help make ends meet, I put in extra hours at work, which helped relieve some of the financial strain. But the following month, Larry repeated the same behavior, and I found myself feeling more and more frustrated. I couldn't understand how he could be so careless with his earnings, especially when I was working so hard to contribute to our household. In a moment of anger, I lashed out with hurtful words, though I quickly regretted my outburst. However, when Larry once again found himself without money for the 5th month in a row, I reached my breaking point. I had been meticulously managing our finances, working tirelessly not just at my day job, but also on my growing graphic design business, which was becoming our main source of income. It was becoming clear that something had to change, and I couldn't keep carrying the burden alone. I had reached my limit. "How could you let this happen again? Have you learned nothing?" I scolded Larry, my frustration boiling over. Despite his attempts to justify his actions, I was done bearing the weight of his financial irresponsibility. It was a tough decision, but I made it clear that I wasn't going to bail him out this time. Larry reacted with indignation and defensiveness, but I stood firm. "You can't gamble away your entire paycheck and expect me to cover for you," I asserted. "I won't enable this behavior any longer." Our argument quickly escalated, with accusations flying back and forth, until finally, Larry stormed out, leaving me alone to grapple with the turmoil of our crumbling relationship. In the aftermath of our confrontation, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Larry's behavior than met the eye. Suspicions began to creep in, and I wondered if Lily, his overbearing mother, might be involved. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to do some investigating while Larry was out. It didn't take long for me to find what I was looking for. Larry had carelessly left his bank account logged in on my laptop, and what I discovered shocked me. Contrary to his claims of being broke, Larry had more than enough money squirreled away. As I scrutinized his transactions, I found nothing unusual, just the usual debits and credits. But I couldn't understand why he had been hiding his finances from me and telling lies. Seeking clarity, I delved into his messages, and the first person I noticed him texting was his mother, Lily. Their conversation revolved around our recent altercation, with Larry painting me as the antagonist, claiming I had berated him for withholding money. Lily seemed to revel in the discord, affirming her suspicions about me. As I scrolled further, I uncovered a disturbing revelation. Lily had been relentlessly disparaging me to Larry, labeling me as materialistic, and insinuating that I was only with him for financial gain. Ironically, I was the primary breadwinner in our household. Their exchanges showed how Lily's toxic influence had fueled Larry's grievances against me, magnifying minor annoyances and nurturing his resentment. The final blow came when I realized just how deeply Lily's words had seeped into Larry's mind, twisting his perception of our relationship and turning him against me. The truth was out, and it left me reeling. When I discovered their scheme to cut me off financially, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Initially hesitant, Larry gradually gave in to Lily's manipulations, slowly yielding to her demands. He unknowingly provided her with more ammunition by sharing moments where I had expressed my frustrations, further fueling her animosity toward me. This betrayal was devastating, leaving me overwhelmed with hurt and confusion. Unsure of my next steps, I turned to my best friend, Mary, seeking solace in her comforting presence. I confided in her, revealing the distressing truth I had uncovered and desperately seeking her guidance in this tumultuous moment. Mary, ever the steadfast confidant, listened intently, offering her unwavering support as I struggled to process the betrayal inflicted by those closest to me. The situation weighed heavily on me, and I found myself at a crossroads, uncertain of the best course of action. It seemed glaringly obvious cut off Larry's support, wait for him to hit rock bottom, and then file for divorce. But Mary questioned the morality of such a plan, suggesting that it might be too harsh. Her concern prompted me to reconsider my approach, and she advised me to sleep on it and revisit the issue the next day. Exhausted both physically and emotionally, I welcomed the respite that sleep promised. The next morning, with the luxury of a weekend ahead, Mary and I decided to find comfort in the familiarity of a favorite movie. We drifted off to sleep in each other's company, the tranquility of the day offering a temporary sense of peace, a brief reprieve from the turmoil brewing within me. We indulged in simple pleasures, immersing ourselves in movies, enjoying culinary delights, and savoring each other's company. Despite the nagging thoughts of the previous day's revelations, I made a conscious effort to set them aside, prioritizing the much-needed break from the stress and heartache I had been experiencing. However, our peaceful reprieve was short-lived. A call from Lily shattered the calm. Reluctantly, I answered, only to be met with accusations and hostility. Her unwarranted attacks only served to heighten the tension, but with Mary's encouragement, I managed to maintain my composure amidst Lily's tirade. Then, amidst the hostility, an unexpected proposal emerged, a 40/60 split of everything between Larry and me. It was a proposition that dripped with skepticism, clearly a test of my commitment to the marriage. Despite the audacity of her demand, it left me contemplating the next steps in what was becoming an increasingly difficult and painful situation. I agreed, willing to explore any possibility of salvaging what was left of our relationship. With a tentative acceptance, we set plans in motion, culminating in a scheduled meeting on Friday to formalize the arrangement. Despite the lingering uncertainty, I resolved to face the challenge head-on, armed with newfound determination to navigate the tumultuous waters ahead. I was stunned by the turn my marriage had taken, caught between disbelief and seething anger. How could Lily brand me a gold digger? And how could Larry stand by and allow such an accusation? I had stood by him through thick and thin, supporting his endeavors even when they led to losses. I had covered for him when he lied and shouldered the burden of our shared responsibilities, all while keeping my own side hustle a secret, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. When I shared the details with Mary, her smile hinted at the brilliance of the plan. Splitting everything evenly would leave Larry with little to fall back on, given his lack of awareness about my additional income. I had initially hoped to surprise him with a lavish gift once my side venture gained traction, but now I was simply grateful to have it as a safety net. Friday arrived quickly, and Mary accompanied me for support. When we arrived home, we found Lily, Larry, and a lawyer already there, finalizing the contract. Ignoring Larry's silent plea for privacy, I approached Lily and demanded to review the terms. As expected, the agreement mandated an equal division of assets, with a clause prohibiting financial assistance between us. Reluctantly, I signed, knowing it would leave Larry scrambling financially. Predictably, problems ensued. Initially, our communication was limited to curt words, the rift between us too deep to bridge. Yet, living under the same roof required some level of interaction. Larry attempted to reach out and mend the divide, but I remained distant, resentful of his complacency in the situation. As time passed, Larry's persistent attempts to reconnect grew tiresome. The weight of our fractured relationship hung heavily over us, and I found it increasingly difficult to maintain my resolve. Despite everything, the reality of our situation was sinking in, and I knew that the path forward would not be easy. I eventually gave in. "Will you please just talk to me? We can't keep going on like this," Larry pleaded, his voice filled with a longing that caught me off guard. It was jarring to hear him express how much he missed our connection, especially after he had willingly signed away our financial unity. "What do you want me to say, Larry?" I retorted, my frustration clear. "Is that why you agreed to sever our finances completely?" His silence was deafening, revealing the deep divide between us as we stood at the brink of our shattered marriage. I struggled with the weight of our choices, unsure if reconciliation was even possible. "I just need to know where your loyalty lies, Laura," Larry implored. "Despite all the issues caused by your mother, you still choose to side with her. Is this truly what you believe is best for us?" "Please, Larry, don't speak ill of my mother like that. And what wealth are you so concerned about?" "I don't understand," I countered, feeling both confused and hurt. "I'm simply trying to make things right between us. Can we not lash out at each other?" "There will be no reconciliation until that contract is null and void," Larry replied defensively. "It's only been 3 weeks since we signed it, and I've seen no evidence to suggest you're not here for the money. If you're struggling financially, just let me know. I'm willing to help," I offered, trying to bridge the gap between us. "Wouldn't that be a breach of the contract?" "I won't risk violating it," I insisted. "Why are you making this so difficult? Can't we just be civil?" I could see Larry wrestling with conflicting influences, his mother's and his own. The Larry I married wouldn't have succumbed to such manipulation. That month, I focused on paying off our major debts, leaving Larry to manage on his own. With my share settled, I had more disposable income, and Mary and I indulged in lavish outings, while Larry always had an excuse for his financial constraints. My graphic design side gig was thriving, and I began to seriously consider quitting my day job. Meanwhile, Larry struggled, his portion of the pantry often bare. While a part of me felt sympathy for him, I couldn't ignore the choices he had made that led us here. I reminded myself that Larry had brought this situation upon himself, but that didn't make the unfolding events any easier to handle. Lily's unexpected visit, however, threw me off balance. She stormed into my home, her face a mask of anger, and before I could even greet her, she accused me of stealing from Larry. The words hit me like a slap in the face. Not only was I confused, but I was also immediately on the defensive. How could she possibly think I was stealing from my own husband? "What are you talking about?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're accusing me of seeking revenge on Larry because I don't like the contract he made us sign? That's absurd. Your son has been struggling all month, but it's not because I've been stealing his money to fund my outings. He has no money to steal, and you know it. And let's not forget who actually coerced us into signing that contract in the first place. You forced it upon us, and now your son is paying the price." Lily's eyes narrowed, and I could see her temper flaring. "Liar," she shouted. "I'm calling the police right now." "Go ahead," I replied, meeting her gaze head-on. "I haven't taken a single cent from your son. You won't find anything because there's nothing to find." "Then how do you have so much money?" she demanded, not backing down. "Your job doesn't pay that much more than Larry's, and he's told me you've cut back your hours. So where's all this money coming from?" I took a deep breath, deciding that now was the time to lay it all out. "I have another business on the side," I began. "A graphic design venture that I've been working on for a while now. I was planning to surprise Larry with it, to show him what I'd accomplished. But thanks to your constant meddling, that plan went down the drain. I was even going to use the money to buy you a car as a gesture of goodwill, to show you that I'm not the person you think I am." Lily looked taken aback, but she wasn't ready to relent just yet. "How much do you make from this side business?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "More than you'd expect," I answered. "I've worked hard to build something successful, something I'm proud of. And all this time, I wasn't lying or trying to deceive anyone. I was simply trying to do something good, something positive. And now, thanks to your interference, everything I've worked for has been jeopardized. If you care so much about your son, maybe you should be the one supporting him instead of tearing down everything I've built." With that, I took a deep breath and reached into my bag, pulling out a set of divorce papers that I had been holding onto for this moment. The sight of them seemed to take Lily by surprise, but I was beyond caring about her reaction. I turned to Larry, who had been standing silently by, his expression a mix of guilt and resignation. "I didn't want it to come to this, Larry," I said, my voice softening as I addressed him. "I tried to make things work, even after everything that's happened. But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep living under the shadow of your mother's influence, and I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when it's not. I've worked hard to build a life for myself, and I deserve to be with someone who supports that, not someone who lets their mother tear us apart." Larry looked down, unable to meet my eyes. Lily opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off before she could start. "This isn't just about money," I continued. "It's about respect, trust, and the foundation of a relationship that should have been built on mutual support. I've done everything I can to support you, Larry, even when things were tough. But I need to take care of myself now. I need to protect what I've built." With those words, I handed the divorce papers to Larry. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of everything that had led us to this point. Lily looked at the papers, then at Larry, her face a mask of disbelief. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, and the road ahead would be filled with challenges. But I also knew that I couldn't keep sacrificing my own happiness and well-being for the sake of a relationship that was no longer healthy. As I turned to leave, I felt a sense of finality, but also a sense of relief. I had taken the steps I needed to protect myself, and now it was time to move forward. Whatever the future held, I was ready to face it on my own terms, with the knowledge that I had done everything I could to make things right. I had filed for divorce right after we signed the contract, quietly holding onto the papers until the right moment to reveal them. When I finally handed them to Larry, the shock on his face was unmistakable, but I felt no sympathy. I had given him every chance to make things right, and he had chosen his path. I expected Lily to be pleased, given how hard she had pushed for this separation. Instead, her expression shifted to one of fury as she realized the full consequences this would have for her son. I calmly informed them that I would be moving out in last weeks. I had made up my mind, and there was no going back. I agreed to continue splitting the remaining loan payments, but that was the extent of my commitment. Larry, clearly desperate, tried to plead with me, hoping to change my mind, but I remained resolute. I reminded him that this was the outcome of his choices and actions, and that we had both reached a point of no return. In the months that followed, I began to feel a sense of liberation from the toxic relationship that had been weighing me down for so long. Lily, as expected, tried to contest the divorce, likely hoping to salvage something from the situation. However, with our assets already legally separated, there was little for Larry to gain from the proceedings. In fact, he ended up losing more than he ever imagined. Unable to keep up with the mortgage payments on the house, he was forced to sell it and move back in with his mother. As for me, my life took a turn for the better. My graphic design business began to flourish, far beyond what I had initially envisioned. I started landing lucrative opportunities with big brands, and my client base expanded rapidly. It was a blissful and rewarding period for me, one that filled me with a sense of accomplishment and relief. I finally felt like I was in control of my life, free from the negativity and constant stress that had overshadowed my marriage. Every day, I felt grateful that I had something to fall back on. My side business, which had started as a small venture, had grown into a successful and profitable enterprise. This financial independence spared me from the fate Larry had to endure, and it allowed me to move forward without the burden of our past weighing me down. Larry's situation was quite different. With the house sold and his financial stability shattered, he struggled to adjust. Moving back in with his mother was a blow to his pride, and I could only hope that this experience would serve as a lesson for him in the future. Perhaps he would learn the importance of responsibility, trust, and the consequences of allowing others to manipulate his decisions. But those lessons were no longer my concern. I was focused on building my own future now. I embraced the opportunities that lay ahead, excited about what was to come. The freedom to pursue my passions, the success of my business, and the peace that came with leaving a toxic situation behind filled me with a sense of fulfillment I hadn't felt in years. Life was finally moving in a positive direction, and I was determined to make the most of it. I surrounded myself with supportive friends, like Mary, who had stood by me through thick and thin. Together, we celebrated the small victories and the big achievements, knowing that this new chapter in my life was just the beginning. Looking back, I realized how far I had come and how much I had grown. The painful experiences of the past had shaped me into a stronger, more resilient person. I was no longer the woman who had been manipulated and overshadowed by others. I was now someone who knew her worth, who understood the value of independence, and who was ready to take on the world with confidence. The future was bright, and I was ready to face it with open arms. No longer burdened by the mistakes and betrayals of the past, I was free to pursue my dreams and live life on my own terms. And that, more than anything, was the most rewarding part of this entire journey.
Hi, I'm Lily, and before I get into my story, please don't forget to like and subscribe so you can hear more about how I faced one of the hardest nights of my life. This experience completely turned my world upside down, and I'm here to share it with you. Thank you for being here to listen. It all started on what was supposed to be a wonderful evening. The night was meant to be a celebration held at Mrs. Thomas's extravagant home. Her house was stunning, with its grand crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, casting a beautiful, warm light all around. The dinner table was perfectly set, with fine china that looked like it had come straight out of a high-end store, each piece gleaming under the soft glow of the lights. It was the kind of family dinner where everyone was supposed to enjoy themselves, and I was genuinely excited. I had some incredible news to share. Recently, I had been promoted at work, and it was a big deal for me. I had been working hard in my marketing career for years, and this promotion to senior marketing director felt like a huge accomplishment. I remember standing in front of the mirror, making sure my dress looked perfect, smoothing out any wrinkles, and taking a deep breath. I was ready to tell everyone and expected that they would be happy for me. I imagined smiles, applause, and maybe even a toast to celebrate. As we started eating the appetizers, I felt nervous but also eager to share my news. I leaned over to my husband, Adam, who was sitting beside me, and whispered, "I have some great news to share." He gave me a nod and smiled encouragingly, letting me know that it was the right time to speak up. So I took a deep breath, turned to the rest of the family, and with a big smile, I announced, "I've been promoted to senior marketing director." But instead of the applause and excitement I was expecting, the room went completely silent. The smiles vanished, and everyone just stared at me. Mrs. Thomas, Adam's mother, who was sitting at the other end of the table, narrowed her eyes at me. Her lips pressed tightly together, forming a thin line of disapproval. She leaned in towards Adam and, in a voice just loud enough for me to hear, hissed, "Is this what we raised him for? To be overshadowed by his wife's career?" Her words cut through me like a knife. I glanced at Adam, hoping he would stand up for me, but instead, he seemed to shrink under his mother's gaze. The supportive smile he had given me moments earlier faded away, and I felt his hand, which had been holding mine under the table, slowly pull away. Trying to keep the mood light and salvage the moment, I smiled and said, "It's a great opportunity for us, Adam. The raise is significant and will help us in so many ways." But before I could finish, Mrs. Thomas interrupted me. Her voice was sharp and filled with judgment as she asked, "What about starting a family, Lily? Do you really think money can replace the joy of having children?" Her words hit hard, and before I could respond, Adam, who had been silent up until now, joined in. His voice had turned cold, much colder than I had ever heard it. "Yeah, Lily," he said. "When are you planning to slow down and settle into family life? This career isn't everything." I was stunned. My heart sank, not just from the words, but from the betrayal I felt in Adam's voice. This was the man who had always been proud of me, who had supported me every step of the way in my career. And now, here he was, siding with his mother against me. With my voice trembling, I replied, "I thought you were proud of me." By now, the main course had been served, but the joyous atmosphere from earlier was gone. The conversations around the table shifted to other topics, but the tension was still there, hanging in the air like a thick fog. The roast beef on our plates was simmering, but the tension between Adam, his mother, and me simmered even more. Adam's behavior became more and more hostile as the evening went on. Every glance, every word, was filled with disapproval, just like his mother's. It felt like they were teaming up against me, and I couldn't understand why. The people who should have been the most supportive were the ones making me feel small. Then, just as dessert was being served, something I will never forget happened. The waiter had just placed a beautiful piece of cake in front of me when Adam suddenly stood up from his seat. He grabbed his napkin and threw it onto the table with a loud thud. Everyone turned to look at him, shocked by the sudden outburst. "You should know your place, Lily," he said, his voice echoing through the dining room. "You're my wife, not my competitor." His words hung in the air, and I sat there in disbelief. The room, once filled with the warm glow of chandeliers, now felt cold and unwelcoming. I stood up, my heart racing, trying to steady my breathing. "Being your wife doesn't mean I have to give up my dreams, Adam. I deserve respect, not this," I said firmly, my voice shaking slightly, but filled with determination. In that moment, something changed in Adam. Before I could react, he raised his hand, and in a sudden flash, one that would haunt my nightmares for years, he struck me across the face. The sharp sound of the slap echoed through the room, freezing everyone in place. The room fell into complete silence as I lifted a trembling hand to my cheek, feeling the sting of pain spreading across my face. All eyes at the table were fixed on me, wide with shock and disbelief, but no one moved or said a word. I didn't speak either. Instead, I turned slowly, pushing my chair back. The legs of the chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor, a sound that felt like it cut through the silence. I began walking toward the foyer, my steps steady even though my mind was spinning. The sound of my heels hitting the marble floor was the only thing I could hear, like the steady beat of a drum marking my escape. I reached for my purse without glancing back. Not even once. I didn't need to. I already knew that what was behind me, my marriage, my life with Adam, was over. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit my skin, and I closed the door softly behind me. The quiet click of the door closing felt like the final punctuation on this chapter of my life. It was over. My marriage was over. In that moment, standing outside in the dark, cool night, I knew I had to leave. I had to find a place where my ambitions weren't seen as something to be ashamed of, where I could breathe freely and finally be myself again. For too long, I had lived in the shadow of someone else's expectations. Now, it was time to step out of that shadow and find my own way. As I drove away, I watched the house grow smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror, a strange mix of fear and relief swirling inside me. I was truly alone for the first time in a long time. But there was something else too, something new, a spark of hope, a sense of freedom. It was small, but it was there, flickering inside me like a light that had just been lit. I knew this was the beginning of a new journey, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. The next morning, I woke up in my small apartment, sunlight streaming through the windows. It felt like the first day of a new life, like everything had changed overnight. The events of the previous night still felt fresh in my mind, and yet, at the same time, they seemed distant, almost like they had happened to someone else. My phone buzzed with messages, friends reaching out after hearing whispers about what had happened. Messages of concern, confusion, and questions filled my screen. But I ignored them. I couldn't focus on explaining myself right now. There were more important things I needed to take care of. The first thing I did was pick up the phone and call the divorce attorney I had been recommended. My hand shook slightly as I dialed the number, but I was determined. When the attorney answered, I didn't hesitate. I need to file for divorce, I said, my voice strong. It's urgent. The attorney's response was calm and professional. Understood, they said. I'll prepare the initial paperwork. Can you come in this afternoon to go over the details? Yes, I'll be there, I replied. After hanging up the phone, I felt a small, victorious thrill. There was no turning back now. The decision had been made, and I was taking the steps I needed to move forward. At work, I tried to focus, though my mind kept wandering back to everything that had happened. My boss, Mr. Brandon, noticed my distraction and approached me with a concerned look. Everything all right, Lily? He asked gently. I'm dealing with some personal issues, but I'll manage. Thank you, I replied, trying to sound composed. If you need time off, just let me know, he offered. No, I'd rather keep busy. It helps, I said, giving him a small smile. He nodded in understanding. Well, let me know if you need anything. Thank you, I said, grateful for his kindness. As I returned to my work, I couldn't help but feel that despite the chaos in my personal life, I was taking control. The steps I was taking were difficult, but they were necessary. It was the start of something new, and while I didn't know exactly where this new path would take me, I was ready to find out. I threw myself into my work, finding comfort in the familiar tasks that helped keep my mind off everything going on in my personal life. The routine of my job was a welcome distraction, and my coworkers were incredibly supportive, which made it easier to breathe, even when the weight of my marriage falling apart felt overwhelming. Hey, Lily, I heard about last night. Are you okay? Mary, one of my closest friends at work, asked me, her voice filled with concern. It's been tough, Mary, I admitted, trying to keep my voice steady. But I'll get through it. Mary gave me a reassuring smile. You're stronger than you think. And if you ever need a place to crash or just hang out, my door is always open. Don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks, Mary, I said, feeling grateful for her kindness. I might take you up on that. How about drinks after work? My treat, she offered, flashing me a grin. I smiled back. That sounds perfect. Later that evening, over drinks, Mary and I talked about everything. I poured out my heart to her, sharing the details of my crumbling marriage and the emotional roller coaster I had been on. Despite all the turmoil and uncertainty, I found moments of relief in our conversation. Mary's presence and our laughter, even if just for a few hours, helped me feel like things would be okay. When I finally returned to my apartment, I checked my phone and saw several missed calls from Adam. My heart sank as I debated whether or not to call him back. After thinking it over, I decided not to. Instead, I sent him a text message that I knew I needed to send. I've filed for divorce. Please respect my space during this time. I typed and hit send. His reply came almost instantly. It was full of desperation. Can we talk about this, please? I didn't mean it, Lily. I'm sorry. I stared at his message for a moment, my emotions swirling. I knew what I needed to say. I need space, Adam. Good night, I replied, keeping my response firm but brief. As I put my phone away, I felt a wave of mixed emotions wash over me: sadness, relief, anger, and something else. Determination. I was free now, or at least I was on the path to freedom. There was no turning back. I looked around my small apartment, which was simple but cozy. It was my space, my sanctuary. No one could hurt me here, and that gave me a deep sense of peace. This was where I could start fresh and rebuild. As I thought about Adam, I realized how much his own decisions had led us to this point. His mother's toxic influence had clouded his judgment, and in the end, he had pushed me away. It was sad, really, that he had let himself get caught up in someone else's views, but that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt something new stirring inside me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was stepping into a new phase of life. A phase where I could finally start living again. Tomorrow, I would be stronger, and the day after, even more so. This was just the beginning, and I knew I was ready for whatever came next. In the days that followed, I focused on my career with renewed energy. I threw myself into my work, becoming more involved in larger, more impactful marketing campaigns. My hard work didn't go unnoticed, and soon, my network began to grow as I connected with influential people in the industry. I was invited to host webinars and lead workshops, showcasing my expertise and leadership skills. My career was taking off, and I felt proud of how far I had come. One busy Sunday morning, I was sitting at my desk, reviewing campaign proposals, when my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Glancing at the screen, I saw it was Amy, a well-known contact in the marketing world. "Hey, Lily," she greeted me warmly when I answered. "Hi, Amy. How's it going?" I replied, surprised but pleased to hear from her. "I've got a project I think you'd be perfect for," she said, excitement clear in her voice. "Are you free to chat about it later this week?" My heart skipped a beat. This was the kind of opportunity one had been working towards, and it felt like the next step in my journey to success. "Absolutely," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the excitement bubbling inside me. "I'd love to hear more." As I hung up the phone, I smiled to myself. I was moving forward, both personally and professionally. The life I was building for myself was full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly excited for what the future held. There would still be challenges ahead, of course, but I was ready to face them. I was no longer the woman who had felt small and trapped in her marriage. I was stepping into a new chapter of my life, and I was determined to make the most of every opportunity that came my way. "I heard through the grapevine about what you've been going through. I'm really sorry you had to deal with that," Amy said, her voice sympathetic but still professional. "Thanks, Amy. It's been tough, but I'm managing," I replied, trying to stay composed. "Listen," she continued. "I've been thinking. There's an opening for a speaker at a conference next month. The topic is resilience and leadership, and I believe your experience, both personal and professional, would really resonate with the audience. What do you think?" The offer caught me off guard. I hadn't expected something like this, but I knew it was an opportunity one couldn't pass up. Speaking about resilience in front of an audience felt fitting after everything I had been through. "I'd be honored, Amy. Thank you so much for thinking of me," I said, feeling a sense of pride. As my career continued to grow, so did my reputation. But with that growth, I also began to hear whispers about Adam. His behavior had not gone unnoticed, and soon enough, people in the industry were talking about it. The same people who once respected him were now distancing themselves. At an industry meetup one day, I overheard bits of a conversation between two executives. "He's looking for work again," one of them said, shaking his head. "After what he did to Lily, who would hire him?" The words stung, but they also felt like confirmation that I wasn't the only one who saw the damage Adam had caused. While my career was thriving, Adam was struggling. The roles had completely reversed. He tried to reach out to me several times, sending messages and asking for help, but I ignored them until one afternoon when I received a text that made me pause. "Can we meet? I really need your help," Adam's message read. Against my better judgment, I agreed to a brief coffee meeting. I didn't know what to expect, but I wanted to hear what he had to say. When we met, Adam seemed like a shadow of his former self. His voice was low as he began. "Lily, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I've lost so much. I can't find work anywhere. It's like all the doors are closed to me." I listened, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me felt sorry for him, but another part of me remembered everything that had happened. "I'm not in a position to rewrite the past, Adam," I said softly but firmly. "You made certain choices, and now you're facing the consequences of those choices. I know, but you could help me. You could talk to people, tell them I've changed," he pleaded. I shook my head gently. "The professional community talks, Adam. People know what happened. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about the choices you made, and people see that." As I left the cafe, I felt a strange mixture of pity and resolve. Adam was learning a hard lesson, one about respect and the long-lasting consequences of his actions. It was a lesson he had brought upon himself, and there was nothing I could do to change that. Back at work, I threw myself into my projects with renewed energy. My experiences, as painful as they had been, were now a source of strength. I was determined to use them to help others. It was bittersweet, realizing that sometimes the hardest personal trials could lead to the greatest professional triumphs. With my divorce finally finalized, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was like I could finally exhale after holding my breath for so long. This new chapter of my life wasn't just about moving on, it was about taking everything I had learned and using it to fuel my future. At work, my role expanded. Beyond my usual responsibilities, I started a mentorship program for young women in marketing. I wanted to give back, to help others navigate the challenges I had faced, both in my career and in life. My own experiences of overcoming adversity drove me to create a space where these women could feel supported and empowered. One day, during a mentorship session, I met Lauren, a bright and ambitious intern who reminded me a lot of myself at her age. She was eager to learn and filled with potential. During one of our conversations, she looked up at me with curiosity, her notebook in hand, ready to take notes. "Lily, how do you handle criticism, especially from people who think you don't belong?" she asked earnestly. Her question made me pause. I thought back to all the moments when I had been doubted or questioned, both in my personal life and in my career. The answer wasn't easy, but it was something I had learned through experience. "You have to remember that criticism often says more about the person giving it than about you," I told her. "There will always be people who think you don't belong or who doubt your abilities. But it's up to you to prove them wrong by staying true to yourself and your goals. Don't let their opinions define you. You belong where you are, and the only person who needs to believe that is you." Lauren nodded, a thoughtful look crossing her face. "Thank you, Lily. That really helps." I smiled, feeling proud not only of the progress I had made in my own life, but also of the impact I could have on others. This was the new chapter one had worked so hard to create, and I was ready for whatever came next. I smiled at Lauren, encouraging her. "You listen, you learn, and then you let your work speak for itself. Never let someone else's doubts become your reality. Instead, use those doubts as fuel to work even harder." Lauren nodded, quickly scribbling down notes. "But what if it gets really tough?" she asked, looking up at me. "Then you reach out," I said. "Lean on your network, find mentors, and never be afraid to ask for help. We're stronger together." I emphasized the importance of having support during challenging times. The mentorship program wasn't the only bright spot in my life. My social circle had also grown, and I was often invited to speak at industry events and social gatherings, where I shared my story and the lessons I had learned. At one such event, a networking dinner for top marketing professionals, I was approached by Scott, a former colleague who had heard about my recent achievements. "Lily, I have to say, your talk was really inspiring," Scott said with admiration in his voice. "How do you keep pushing forward after everything?" "It's about not letting your past define your future," I replied with a nod, accepting his compliment. Every challenge is just another stepping stone to something greater. As the evening went on, our conversation shifted from casual talk to a deeper discussion about potential collaborations. "Lily, have you ever thought about writing a book?" Scott suggested. "Your story could inspire so many people." The idea intrigued me. By the end of the night, I had exchanged contact information with the publisher, who was also at the event. It seemed like every social interaction was opening new doors for me, a clear sign of how far I had come. I couldn't help but feel proud of the progress I had made, both personally and professionally. As I continued to grow in my career, my confidence soared. I was leading workshops, running marketing campaigns, and becoming a voice for resilience and empowerment in the marketing world. Each speaking engagement and workshop wasn't just about sharing my knowledge, it was about healing myself. I was turning my past pain into lessons for others to learn from. After a long day filled with back-to-back events, I lay in bed one night, reflecting on just how much my life had transformed. I was no longer the woman sitting silently at that dinner table, suffering in silence. I had become a leader, a mentor, and a survivor. I had taken the difficult moments of my life and turned them into something meaningful. This wasn't just a new beginning for me, it was a vibrant continuation of a journey that I was proud to call my own. Months went by, and the memories of my past with Adam had faded into the background, overshadowed by the busy and fulfilling life I was living. I was focused on my future, and the echoes of that time were barely a whisper. But one afternoon, during a coffee meetup with Isabella, a mutual friend, those old echoes came back to life. "Lily," Isabella began cautiously, "Adam's been asking about you. He's really struggling, says he regrets everything." I sipped my coffee, letting her words sink in. "People often regret things when they start to feel the consequences of their actions," I replied calmly. "He wants to talk to you, maybe apologize." "He seems sincere," Isabella continued, looking at me with a mix of hope and concern. I thought about it for a moment, but then shook my head. "Isabella, I appreciate you telling me, but that part of my life is over. I've moved on," I said firmly. There was no room in my life for looking back. My focus was on the future, on the new opportunities and relationships I had built. Isabella nodded, understanding the finality in my words. We quickly changed the subject, leaving the past where it belonged behind me. Despite Adam's attempts to reach out through messages and calls, I had no desire to revisit that chapter of my life. The truth was, I had already come so far. My life now is full of promise, and I was surrounded by people who supported me and valued my growth. I wasn't the person who had once been trapped in a relationship that stifled me. I had become someone who embraced challenges, who thrived in the face of adversity, and who was determined to keep moving forward. Looking back, I realized that every struggle I had faced had shaped me into the person I was today. And as I stood at the forefront of my career, leading with confidence and empowering others, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The future was mine to shape, and I was ready to face whatever came next, with no regrets. I stayed firm in my decision to keep my distance. Each time Adam tried to reach out, I remained silent. It wasn't out of anger, but because I needed to protect my own well-being. Through my journey, I learned how important it was to set boundaries and respect myself. In the months that followed, my career continued to grow. I spoke at conferences, led exciting marketing campaigns, and saw my mentorship program flourish. The impact I was making felt real and fulfilling. Sharing my story on different platforms inspired others who were also facing their own challenges. One evening, as I reflected on the past year, I realized how much I had changed. I hadn't just survived, I had thrived. My life was now filled with purpose and success. Knowing that Adam regretted his choices wasn't something that gave me satisfaction. Instead, it reminded me of the serious consequences of disrespecting others. As I closed my journal, which was filled with plans and reflections, I felt a deep sense of peace. My experience with Adam had pushed me onto a path of empowerment and achievement. My victory wasn't in his regret, but in my own strength, turning pain into power and living a life based on my own values. As we end this story, I'd love to hear from you. Do you think Lily was right in cutting Adam out of her life? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.
Hannah is really cute. The moment the door opened and I heard her name from James' voice, I froze. I was wondering who it might be, and hearing her name confirmed it. It was my sister, Hannah. Jamie kept calling out to Hannah repeatedly. Shivering, I suddenly came to my senses. I knew I had to record what was happening, so I used my phone to capture the moment and then quietly left. Later, when the two of them came out of the bedroom and saw me, they looked really shocked. I told them I had sent the video to Kevin and we needed to talk about what to do next, all four of us together. At this, Hannah looked even more scared. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Just what I said," I replied, holding up my phone. "I've got the video." My name is Sandra. I'm a 50-year-old housewife with twin boys in 6th grade. Twins run in our family. I have an identical twin sister, Hannah. We never really felt like sisters, but more like rivals. Growing up, I was always compared to Hannah. She was always seen as the cute and friendly one, while I was shy and quiet. Because of this, people naturally paid more attention to her. Even though we were rivals, I truly loved Hannah. She was always smiling and popular, something I wished I could be. But Hannah didn't feel the same way about me. When we were kids, I always ended up with the roles in games that nobody else wanted. For instance, whenever we played tag and had to choose who was it by playing rock, paper, scissors, Hannah would pressure me into being it so she wouldn't have to. I had no choice but to agree. Hannah's tricky ways weren't just during playtime. In 6th grade, we were picking roles for a school play about Snow White. I wasn't much of an actress and wanted to be the narrator, but I got a cold and missed school on the day they gave out the roles. Hannah said she would tell the teacher I wanted to be the narrator. I trusted her and felt relieved. However, when I came back to school, I found out I was the lead role. "Why am I the lead?" I asked a friend, shocked. "Hannah said you wanted to be the lead," they replied. I was stunned. I never said that. It turned out that as we were getting older, no one else wanted the embarrassing role of Snow White. So they chose me, the quiet girl who wasn't there to say no. The teacher thought it was strange I wanted the lead since I was usually so shy. Hannah had told the teacher, she wants to but she's too shy to volunteer. Let this be a chance for her to shine. I cried, insisting I couldn't do it and didn't want to. But all the other roles were already taken. With pressure from teachers and parents, I went through with it. Surprisingly, the play was a hit. Everyone praised me, teachers, parents, friends. But Hannah wasn't happy. She said anyone could have done that, and getting praise for such a small thing was silly. She began to really show her dislike for me. After that, she stopped asking me to play with her. It hurt at first, but then I realized I was free from being pushed into roles I didn't want. I made other friends and started to enjoy school. In middle school, many didn't even know Hannah, and I were twins. We became so distant, hardly speaking at school and not looking alike at all. We asked to be in different classes, and I was enjoying my own life. Then one day, as I was studying for high school entrance exams, Hannah came over. "Studying? Have you decided which high school you're applying to?" "Yeah, I'm thinking of going to the newest high school. It's close to our house and quite competitive." I had been working hard for 5 years because I really wanted to get into a particular high school. But when Hannah heard about my choice, she laughed. "Hey, that high school? You've got to be kidding, right? Why don't you just go to high school with me? It sounds like you wouldn't even need to study much for that. Hannah always seemed to get her way, but I didn't want her making decisions about my high school too. For the first time, I stood up to her. I've decided to go to a high school. You don't know if it's impossible for me. If you don't want to study, that's fine, but don't get in my way. I turned back to my textbook, but Hannah was upset by my response. That tone to your older sister? She said angrily, then grabbed my textbook and threw it on the floor. What are you doing? Even if you study, it's a waste. You know you're destined to be my slave and go to high school with me. That day, we ended up fighting physically. Our parents heard the noise and came to separate us, but by then, my textbook was torn to pieces. More than that, my heart was broken by hearing Hannah's true feelings about me. I realized she just saw me as a target for all the unpleasant things. But I didn't give up on studying. Luckily, my parents got me a new textbook. With their support, Hannah no longer interfered with my studies, and I was able to focus and successfully got into my chosen school. Hannah, as she had initially said, barely studied for the exams and went to high school. We went to different high schools, attended different universities, and started our careers. As an adult, I began living on my own, and that's when I met a man named James. James and I were hired at the same time and felt a closeness because we were from the same area. When he asked me out, I felt like I was dreaming. I actually like you, Sandra. I'd be happy if you'd go out with me, he said. Hearing those words made me incredibly happy. I had feelings for James too, but I had never had the courage to admit such feelings openly. I wasn't pretty like Hannah and hadn't really dated during my school days, so it was hard to believe that James felt the same way about me. Being in a relationship for the first time made me really happy. Since we started dating, I've tried my best to make him happy by cooking meals and preparing lunch boxes for him. James began visiting my apartment more often, and we started living almost like a couple. Sandra, I'll cook dinner tonight, James would say. It wasn't just me doing things for him. James helped a lot with the housework. Doing chores together was fun, and I began to think we could be a good married couple. 5 years into our relationship, we decided to get married, which made me very happy, but one thing worried me. You're a twin, right? I'd like to meet your sister, James brought it up. Over the 5 years we were dating, I had told him about having a twin sister, Hannah, but I had never introduced him to her. I hadn't even told her about having a boyfriend since our big fight in middle school had driven a deep wedge between us. Yeah, that's right. But we're getting married, so it's inevitable that Hannah and James will meet. I was anxious about how Hannah might react, but I knew I had to introduce them at some point. When I finally called Hannah after a long time, she seemed surprised by my news. Married? Since when? She raised her voice. I had told my parents, but it seems Hannah hadn't heard about it yet. Yeah, and I want to introduce you to the man I'm going to marry. I'm busy, you know. Well, if you insist, I guess I could meet him. Hannah was as condescending as ever. So I asked her to make some time for us. Hannah hadn't changed since we were kids. I figured I had to be the adult and humble myself. We went back home to meet Hannah on her day off. James suggested we all have a meal together with our parents, so we arranged to meet at a restaurant. On the day, we went to the restaurant, but Hannah was late. Hannah's late. I thought she said she'd be on time. Sorry, James. Don't worry about it. She'll show up eventually. Let's just wait a bit longer, I said. Both my parents and I felt bad for keeping James waiting. 15 minutes past the scheduled time, Hannah showed up in a flashy dress. Sorry, did you wait? We did. What's with the outfit? Well, it's kind of like a meet and greet, right? Thought I'd dress up. I was frustrated with Hannah for being late, especially since she took extra time to dress up. Our parents just smiled a bit, but I wish she had messaged us about being late. I felt like it was immature for an adult, but I kept quiet to avoid any issues. We introduced Hannah and James to each other. Hannah made several rude comments during their first meeting, asking James many personal questions about his time with me, as if it were an interview. Despite her parents trying to stop her, Hannah kept going, saying she wanted to know what kind of man I was marrying. James was nice about it and answered her questions. By the end of the meal, I was really tired. James then mentioned how different Hannah and I were, calling her always smiling, good at conversation, and cute. He even joked if I'd met her first. I was shocked because I had told him I was uncomfortable around Hannah. His comment hurt me. "Why don't you marry Hannah then? She even said you were handsome," I snapped back. James quickly apologized, saying it was just a joke and he was happy to have met me, not Hannah. He tried to make light of it by saying Hannah was nice and that we shouldn't be jealous of each other. We should get along as a family, now that we're adults. Although I had my doubts, I knew our parents wanted Hannah and me to get along. But I wanted James to be on my side, not pushing me to be closer to Hannah. Still, arguing seemed too much trouble, so I just nodded along to what James said. A few days later, Hannah messaged me, "Isn't James too good for you? Should I take him off your hands?" I was upset by her message. "What are you talking about?" I replied instinctively, and she called me immediately. Hannah insulted me over the phone and laughed, saying it was unbelievable that someone as plain as me would get married before her. She said James was high-earning and well-educated and asked why not hand him over to her since we were twins and had always shared everything. I yelled back at her, telling her not to say stupid things. I couldn't stand James being treated like an object, nor the idea that we always shared everything. In reality, I was always just someone for Hannah to dump the things she didn't want. That night, I told James about the call, warning him to be careful around Hannah. However, James took it lightly and laughed it off, saying it was nice to be liked so much and not to worry because Hannah wasn't serious. I was frustrated because he didn't seem to understand the potential seriousness of her words. "Do you doubt my feelings? It's okay because I say it's okay," he reassured me. Despite him being a great person, I felt like James had changed after meeting Hannah. He would always defend her just because she was my sister, which left me feeling dissatisfied. But James told me not to worry so much and believed that nothing Hannah could do would affect him. Realizing I was unsettled by her words made me see that I hadn't fully trusted James. He was right. I decided to trust him and ignore Hannah's spiteful messages. Fortunately, Hannah didn't interfere with us anymore, and I hoped we could become good sisters and have a happy married life. Years went by, and after I turned 45, my parents told me that Hannah had gotten married. I had blocked her and wasn't in contact, though we occasionally saw each other at our parents' home. Hannah would insult me, being nearly 45 and still unmarried. She seemed resentful and was avoiding me. I was surprised to hear she got married, as she was quite picky, but I was genuinely happy for her. When I learned that Hannah had married, I realized how harsh I had been when she got married only after I did. Later, through my parents, Hannah apologized to me, and we started communicating again. Indeed, Hannah had changed, becoming much calmer than before. It was as if she had returned to the Hannah I once loved. I never thought the day would come when Hannah and I could laugh together again. I was very happy when Hannah introduced me to her husband, Kevin, who was about 6 years older than us. He seemed to really care for Hannah, which made me feel reassured. After we both got married, Hannah and I became closer, and our parents were very happy to see us getting along. I wanted to make up for the time we had spent apart. Then, a few years later, something happened. I became ill at work and had to leave early. I tried to inform James, but he was out on business, so I left a message with a colleague and went straight home. As soon as I entered the house, I felt something was off. It felt like someone was inside, even though the house was supposed to be empty. I thought it might be a burglar. I quietly entered and listened closely. I could hear noises and voices coming from the bedroom. Standing silently in front of the bedroom, I recognized James's voice. The nature of his voice made my heart sink. It was clearly the sound of an intimate moment, and the creaking of the bed confirmed my fears. I didn't need to see inside to know what was happening, and my hands trembled. Thinking James was cheating, I decided to catch him in the act. I carefully opened the door with my smartphone in hand, ready to record. What I saw inside the bedroom was even more shocking. Hannah is really cute, isn't she? I heard James's voice clearly as the door opened. Hearing him say her name, I froze. The female voice was indeed Hannah's. James kept foolishly repeating Hannah's name. Trembling, I recorded the scene and quietly left. I sat in the dining area in shock for a while. I was supposed to be home early because I felt unwell, but the shock made me forget my illness. I just stared blankly at my phone, waiting for this nightmare to end. A few minutes later, the bedroom door opened. "I'll head back to work now, so lock up," said a voice. "Okay, it'd be nice if we could live together soon," another voice responded. Hearing this, I hurriedly stood up. Noticing the noise, James and Hannah saw me in the hallway. "Sandra, why are you here?" James exclaimed, turning pale. "Why? This is my house, right? But why is Hannah here? Aren't you both supposed to be at work?" I asked. Hannah looked away for a moment, but then smirked defiantly. "Why do you think? You wanted it from my own mouth, didn't you?" James tried to stop her, but Hannah wouldn't be silenced. "I've always hated how you look down on me. Happiness and James don't suit you." Hannah declared she'd take everything. I just smiled and replied, "Is that so? Then I'll let you have James, Hannah, but don't think you can take my happiness." Hannah seemed annoyed by my comeback and glared at me. I spoke directly to her. "Yeah, I sent the video to Kevin. Let's discuss this with the four of us soon." Hannah's face turned pale instantly. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Just what I said. If you want James, Kevin should know about this, shouldn't he?" Hannah lunged at me, but James tried to calm her down. Just then, the smartphone in Hannah's bag rang. At the sound, Hannah froze. "Looks like Kevin's calling, isn't it?" I said. Hannah hesitated and looked at her bag, but she didn't answer the call. The room was silent except for the sound of the phone. After a while, it stopped ringing, and then my phone rang. "Sandra, I'm truly sorry. Please forgive Hannah. Can you cover for her with Kevin? If not, Hannah will lose everything," James said, trying to protect her. Hannah started sobbing next to him, like she was the victim. I knew Kevin was not only Hannah's husband, but also the president of the company where she worked. If Kevin found out about her cheating, he might start divorce talks, and she could lose her job. I said, "I can't cover for her." James, as usual, defended Hannah, which infuriated me. Thinking Hannah is the only one who's going to lose her family and job is a huge mistake, I shouted, making James flinch and start sweating. He seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. "Just so you know, I've also sent the video to the company's main email, including your department and name," I told them. By then, Kevin's call had ended, and James and Hannah looked desperate. After kicking them out, I called Kevin. "Sorry to disturb you at work." "It's about the video, right?" he asked gently. "Yes, it involves James," I replied. "I'm sorry for asking this of you," Kevin said. He had felt something was off with Hannah. It might have been plausible for the old Hannah, but the current Hannah truly loved him. I didn't think she would cheat, and I had conveyed as much to Kevin, but just in case. Kevin had asked me to gather evidence if Hannah did something questionable. That's why I was able to film so calmly. Please don't apologize. I'm glad I could capture evidence of James' unfaithfulness. If you hadn't asked me, I probably wouldn't have thought to do it so calmly, I told Kevin. I admitted to him that it was shocking to find out about an affair, especially with my own sister. I had every right to be angry. "My sons will be home soon, so let's talk another time," I said to Kevin and hung up. Tears flowed endlessly, but for my sons and for my future, I knew I had to be strong. That day, I carried on with my usual routines, and after the kids had settled down for the night, James came home. "Were you with Hannah?" I asked him. James, clearly in a bad mood, snapped back, "I got called into HR because of you. The decision on my punishment will come later. What are you going to do about this?" The way James turned the blame on me, making me out to be the villain despite his actions, almost made me laugh. Crying over such a man was a waste of time. "There's nothing to be done. Do as you please. You understand the situation, right? If we divorce, I'm taking the kids. Still want to divorce." His attempt to use our sons as leverage was pathetic, and I told him so. "What are you talking about? You think you'll get custody after likely losing your job? Divorce is a foregone conclusion. Stop being ridiculous," I said. James had nothing to say. Of course, getting caught in adultery during work hours, dismissal seemed inevitable. Was he still so clueless about the gravity of his actions? If so, then he's incredibly foolish. "I'll be leaving tomorrow," I told him. "Wait a minute, can't we consider starting over? Can't you forgive just one affair?" James, now taking a submissive stance, began apologizing. "Just one time," I asked back. According to Kevin, Hannah's behavior had been odd for several months. Given Kevin's job mostly involves being out for sales, there's a good chance she might have been returning home like this just one time. James responded weakly, his eyes darting around from the lack of confidence in his answer. It was clear it wasn't just once. It felt ridiculous to pursue it any further, so I dropped the subject. The next day, I told my sons about James's unfaithfulness. They are in 6th grade now, old enough to understand that hurting and betraying others is wrong. I apologized for having such a serious conversation with my sons during this sensitive time in their lives. They said they wanted to talk it over alone and went to their room. After just a few minutes, they came out with their bags packed and said, "We're on your side, Mom." I couldn't help but cry. The boys laughed and comforted me as I apologized again. Then we went back to my parents' house. My parents were shocked when they heard about Hannah and James's actions. Despite being happy that Hannah and I had become close as sisters again, I felt sorry. "Hannah hasn't changed after all. I'm sorry for always making you endure her. We'll keep our distance from Hannah and James to the bare minimum," Dad said, and I felt relieved. From that day, I started commuting to work from my parents' home. James, perhaps on suspension, didn't come to the office but called me multiple times instead. Ignoring him as I didn't have time to deal with it, he began to send messages day and night. "I love you, Sandra. Let's live happily as a family of 4 again." I was insane. I was just deceived by that woman. "I don't know how to live without you, Sandra." These were what you'd call desperate pleas. I was almost fooled for a moment, but thanks to my sons laughing uproariously at those messages, I realized how ridiculous they were. However, I couldn't ignore him forever. Eventually, I had to meet him to sign the divorce papers. I made plans to meet James at a cafe on my day off, following Kevin's advice to meet in a public place to keep the conversation calm. When Kevin and Hannah arrived at the cafe together, Hannah had become so thin in just a few days she looked like a different person. "Now both Hannah and James, please sign the divorce papers," I said. They hesitated to sign. James said, "It's a misunderstanding, Kevin. It's your choice to divorce, but we won't." "You're still saying that. My sons and I no longer consider you family," I retorted. Kevin sighed deeply and said, "You could go to court, but it's clear you'll lose, considering the alimony and legal fees for the divorce trial. Can you afford it? Of course, you both betrayed your families. Hannah to me and Sandra James, you'll have to pay us a proper settlement in the divorce trial," I added. Hannah started trembling silently. Her silence and weight loss now made sense. "I might be fired. How can I pay?" James began to argue, looking pale. "You did this to yourself. Besides, you owe child support for both kids, right?" I said. At my words, Hannah flinched. You wanted to live together, right? You're welcome to have the house. I laughed loudly. And don't forget the mortgage payments. James was taken aback, probably having forgotten about the mortgage. Both sat sweating, pale and silent, in front of the divorce papers. Later, Kevin introduced me to a lawyer, and I managed to claim alimony and legal fees and finalize the divorce. James, who had resisted the divorce so much, proposed to Hannah immediately after our divorce was finalized. I knew he had liked Hannah from the start. When did their affair turn serious? Hearing this, I felt nothing but disdain. Meanwhile, Hannah, who had genuinely loved Kevin, was abandoned and eventually lost her job too. Why did she end up with James despite loving Kevin so much? Remaining puzzled, I asked Kevin about it. He hesitated before revealing. Actually, she started complaining about you a few months ago. Complaining about how you, who were useless, got married and even have kids. It's extravagant, he explained. Could it really be because of that? I wondered, but considering Hannah's personality, it wasn't impossible. Yet the thought that she went to such lengths just to set me up was horrifying. It was because I thought you might be in danger that I consulted you, Timothy, but I never imagined it would lead to this with James. I'm truly sorry, Kevin said apologetically. It's okay, it's over now, and James is to blame for taking up Hannah's invitation as well, I replied. That concluded our conversation. Kevin and I agreed to keep in touch for updates on the divorce compensation and legal consultations. According to him, the two, burdened with a substantial amount of divorce compensation, ended up marrying and living together. Hannah was abandoned by her parents and had nowhere else to go. It seemed she reluctantly accepted James's proposal because she had no family left. From what the lawyer told me, Hannah couldn't accept that she ended up divorcing Kevin and marrying James, whom she didn't love because of me. The lawyer mentioned getting hurled with abusive language every time he called her. While I felt sorry for the lawyer, he continued to support me firmly, perhaps because of Kevin's presence, and I couldn't be more grateful. For a while, we'll still have to make calls to demand the divorce compensation, and it seems 6 years after the divorce, the compensation and child support were being paid on time, and I had largely healed from my emotional wounds. One day, after a long period of peace, the lawyer contacted me saying Hannah had something urgent to discuss. Knowing her, I expected she would just use the meeting to vent her frustrations at me, so I initially refused. However, Hannah insisted it was urgent, and James also requested a meeting on her behalf. Given their persistence, I reluctantly agreed, but I didn't want to meet them alone. I contacted Kevin, feeling somewhat guilty for doing so after such a long time, but he gladly agreed to accompany me. At the cafe, James and Hannah looked serious. When Hannah saw me, she looked slightly relieved. "What's this about? Why did you call me here?" I asked. Hannah then revealed, "Actually, I've developed renal failure and need to undergo dialysis." James angrily blamed us, saying, "It's your fault, both of your faults, that Hannah ended up like this. She couldn't sleep without drinking alcohol, and because of the divorce settlement pain, she had to work. Your actions have destroyed her health." I thought it was their own doing, and Kevin seemed to agree as he sighed and looked exasperated. "So what? I'm not reducing or refunding the divorce settlement. Be thankful I agreed to installments," I stood firm. Hannah, crying, lowered her head and pleaded, "I'll pay the divorce settlement. Please, I'm begging you, give me a kidney." "What?" I exclaimed loudly at her outrageous request. "What are you talking about? There's no way I'll give it to you." James then said, "You were born a twin with Hannah for this reason. You have a duty to help her." "What are you talking about? Who has been pushing all the unpleasant things onto me? Did Hannah ever help me once in such situations?" I retorted, "Don't talk about trivial matters. Hannah's life is at stake here," James angrily retorted. Hannah began to cry and plead, apologizing, while James insulted me as heartless, pressuring me for the transplant as if threatening. At that moment, Feeling as though I was being blamed, Kevin spoke up. If she needs dialysis, then undergo dialysis. Do you understand how tough dialysis is? And do you understand how difficult a transplant is? Why should she risk her life for Hannah? Their words left them speechless. I felt relieved with Kevin's support and took a deep breath. Moreover, Hannah, you've repeatedly called Sandra useless. Isn't it too convenient to ask for help only when you're in trouble? But that's Hannah for you. You've destroyed Sandra's happy life. Sandra has no obligation to save your life, Kevin pointed out. Hannah broke down crying, and James was at a loss for words. Both of them must have thought that I would surely give them a kidney. If I had been alone, I might have been persuaded. Once again, Kevin saved me. Take care then. Oh, and don't forget the transfer for this month's payment, I said, then got up and left. Whether I'm called heartless or a devil, I cannot forgive them. I don't know what kind of life they will lead from now on, but I hope they never forget what they did and reflect on it. It seems James and Hannah were both working part-time to make ends meet, but now that Hannah can no longer work properly, their financial situation is dire. But that's their karma. Everything is the result of their actions. Their atonement won't end until they've paid the compensation ordered in the divorce settlement. I continue to live happily with my parents and sons. My parents no longer even mention Hannah's name. However, it seems they are happy to see the twins getting along well. It's comforting to see a bond between my sons that Hannah and I never had. I continue to keep in touch with Kevin frequently. He's a genuinely good person, always thoughtful and considerate. It appears he has developed feelings for me, but I'm not ready to reciprocate them at this time. I don't want to cause any more upset for my sons, but in a few years, when they come of age, I hope to have the chance to think about my own happiness again.